Yeah, we back. Now, today's going to be a quick video. I want to respond to a comment that I got in my comment section. This brother said this. You seem to admire Christophe and Dessalines the most. Why don't you place Toussaint Louverture on that same level? What did he do differently? Now, I want to respond to this brother because I think it's a good question. Now, contrary to popular belief, I don't have any problem with Toussaint Louverture. But yes, there is the deliberate reason why my content tends to focus more on Dessalines and Christophe, but it's not that I have anything against Toussaint. I actually have a lot of respect for Toussaint Louverture. I believe he's one of the most brilliant black men of all time. And when I say brilliant, I'm talking about mentally, intellectually. I think he probably had a 200 IQ. If you believe in IQ, I think whatever the highest IQ number there is, I think he was nearing that number. But the reason I focus more on the other two, like you said, is because when you examine the Western narrative of history, they either slander the legacy of those two men or they either try to bury and ignore the legacy of those two men, right? Whereas they try to glorify and push Toussaint Louverture as the main character, which in some cases you could say he was the main character, but there's a deliberate reason why they put all the spotlight and attention on him and they completely ignore or slander the other main characters. And it's not like they don't have the information or the true knowledge on the other main characters, because as you can see, I come up on my channel and I read historical documents that were written at the time, and you don't think that the adversary has access to these same exact documents? Some of these documents are in their national libraries, right? The Library of Congress, the British National Library. I'm pulling these documents directly from their sources, right? In their files, right? So they have the information, but why don't they illuminate on those two individuals, but they focus all the energy and attention on Toussaint? It's a deliberate reason for that, similar to the reason why they might focus more attention on somebody like Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela instead of Malcolm X or Marcus Garvey or individuals like that. One of the main reasons they focus their attention on Toussaint is because they eliminated Toussaint. They vanquished Toussaint. They killed him. They humiliated him. They tortured his wife. They kidnapped his children. They stomped him out of existence, right? So of course, when it comes time to tell the story, they're going to tell you about the guy who they humiliated. We killed him. We tortured his wife, broke damn near every bone in her body, right? They're going to tell you the story about that guy because it makes them look superior and victorious. But one thing we got to understand, Toussaint Louverture wasn't this, soft, supplicating, type of weak character that the Western narratives kind of portray him to be. First things first, we got to give a brief rundown on his rise to power, right? So Toussaint Louverture was born in 1743, which means that in 1791, when the rebellion first broke out, he would have been about 48 years old, right? So he was an elder at the time. He was approaching 50 years old at the very beginning of the revolution. In contrast to Dessalines, who was 33 years old. In contrast to Christophe, who was only, 23, 24 years old, right? Christophe was a baby, right? Christophe was like damn near, a college age type of guy when the revolution broke out. And Toussaint was the elder, damn near 50 years old. And one thing that made me question the Western narrative of Toussaint Louverture as this soft, docile, weak, assimilating character is, if we look at Christophe and Dessalines and we view them as, these merciless black men who showed no mercy to the enemy, showed no mercy to the adversary, right? And we examine how these men, Dessalines and Christophe, had the utmost respect for Toussaint Louverture. They would kill and die for Toussaint Louverture, right? If Toussaint Louverture told Dessalines, listen, that guy, I want him dead, Dessalines would not question it. Guaranteed, no questions asked. That individual would be dead. Do you know in 1802, when the French military invaded, and the first stop they made was in the northern port city that Christophe controlled. And Christophe told the French government, the French general, that I cannot hand over the city to you because I have not received orders from Toussaint Louverture to do so, right? So if these two men, who we view as black men who showed no mercy to the adversary, and that's why we admire them, but when you examine how obedient they were to the orders and the commands of Toussaint Louverture, then I had to really examine his legacy and really think he could not have been this docile, weak character that they present him to us to be. Now, before we examine his mistakes, let's examine some of the positive aspects of Toussaint. Let's examine his rise to power. Like I said, when the rebellion first broke out in 1791, Toussaint Louverture, he crossed over the border into the Spanish side, and he received weapons and resources from Spain because Spain wanted to destabilize the French side of the island because the Spanish wanted to take possession of the lucrative sugar plantations on the other side of the island. So in an effort to expand their plantation operations, they began funding and arming certain rebel factions on the other side to destabilize the French. And Toussaint Louverture took advantage of the tribal wars between the Europeans, right? The Spanish versus the French. So he used the Spanish against the French to gain access to certain weapons and resources to bring war to the French, right? A few years later, in 1794, the French, backed into a corner, they abolished slavery and emancipated the slaves in all their territories, right? In all their colonies across the Caribbean, across the New World. Now, the reason why they did that is because they were under attack by both the Spanish and the British. So in an effort to fortify the military, they wanted to bring in some of the black soldiers, bring in some of the black commanders into their military to defend the colony against the Spanish and against the British, right? So they integrated individuals like Toussaint Louverture into the military structure to defend the colony against the other European powers, right? The Europeans were going through their tribal wars. And keep in mind, when they integrated Toussaint Louverture into the French military, Toussaint Louverture was already commanding his own army from the days when he was fighting on the side of the Spanish, right? So he was commanding an army of thousands of men. So when he came over to the French and he became a general in the French military, he came over with thousands of soldiers. And not only did he come over with thousands of soldiers, but he had the power and the influence to galvanize and rise up the entire enslaved population. So whenever he was in negotiations with the Europeans, or the French in particular, a common thing that he would do if he couldn't get his way during negotiations is he would raise up the entire enslaved population on the colony. The entire enslaved population would rise up at Toussaint Louverture's command at will. And it's because he had that influence, he eventually became the commander-in-chief of the entire colony. Now, the colony was still under the control of the French, but the colony was operating autonomously towards the end of the 1790s. Now, by the year 1800, 1801, Toussaint was essentially the de facto ruler of the colony. Yes, it was still, under French control on paper, but he was handling the day-to-day operations of the territory. He was the de facto head of state. By this time, he was commanding an army of over 50,000 men. All troops on the colony had to report directly to him. No French official, no French general had control over the army. All military appointments were made directly from him, not by the French government. So by this time, he was growing very powerful. And it was around this time that he decided to write his own constitution, declaring himself governor for life. And by this time, all revenue, trade, and exports in the colony were done under his administration and under his decisions, and the French had no say in how the wealth was generated or allocated. So that is the reason why in 1802 Napoleon Bonaparte had sent that massive expedition, that massive military invasion, because of the wealth, power, and influence that Toussaint Louverture was accumulating in the colony. Not to mention the fact that other governments like the United States, the British government, as well as the other colonies in the region, they corresponded directly with Toussaint Louverture and his generals instead of going to the French government. So they didn't even communicate with the French government anymore. They said, listen, I'm gonna go directly to Toussaint and we're gonna trade with him and talk to him and correspond with him, because yes, it's still a French colony on paper, but in the eyes of the world, this is the de facto head of state. So it was for that reason alone, Napoleon Bonaparte sent that massive military invasion and kidnapped him and let him die in prison. Now, the reason why Toussaint Louverture kind of gets a bad rap is because he actually believed that the adversary actually operated off logic and reason, right? Instead of his, racial biases and his ignorance, right? He actually believed that in his mind, right? He believed that if I'm governing the colony and the colony is productive, right? And everybody is at peace, there's no racial discrimination, the blacks living amongst the whites, and Toussaint Louverture was very advanced for the time period. He wanted to establish a society where all groups and those from all different backgrounds can live amongst each other with no prejudice, no bias and discrimination. But the French and the Europeans at the time, no, we want to live under supremacy. We want to have you under our boots. Forget that. We don't care if you're a good governor. We don't care if you're productive and the trade is robust. We do not care, right? We want to maintain white supremacy. And that was the biggest mistake they made, because when you eliminate Toussaint Louverture, now who is going to control Dessalines and Christophe? Who is going to stop Dessalines and Christophe from killing you on sight? Because Toussaint Louverture was the only one standing in their way. Like I said before, when the rebellion first broke out, Toussaint Louverture was about 48 years old. Dessalines was 33 years old. Christophe was 24 years old. So they viewed him as the elder, right? And as young men, they were more hot-headed. In comparison to the poise and the stoic nature of Toussaint, Dessalines and Christophe, they were loose cannons. I remember one time a British spy in 1797 by the name of Marcus Rainsford. He was captured by Christophe and charged with espionage. And he was brought in front of a military court, and Christophe was the judge. And Christophe sentenced him to death, to execution. And Toussaint Louverture intervened and lowered his sentence to deportation, right? So when it came to the young boys, they would just kill the enemy, right? They had no mercy, no question. We killing the enemy on sight. Meanwhile, it was Toussaint Louverture, the only person in the colony who had the power and the influence to minister to them and say, listen, bro, listen, young boy, you know, I feel you. I feel the energy, but listen, don't fly off the handle, right? Don't fly off the handle. He was the only one that they respected to that level, to where whatever he said, it was the gospel. I don't know why. I was not there. You're going to have to ask Dessalines and Christophe themselves. But for whatever reason, when it came to Toussaint Louverture, whatever he said, it was the gospel when it came to Dessalines and Christophe, right? If Toussaint Louverture told Dessalines and Christophe, you have to march 50 miles west and you have to go capture this city and you have to go kill this person, they would not ask him why. They would not ask him no question. They would get on their horse and they would ride. And when I examined that, I had to take a step back and say, this individual is obviously not this soft, docile, weak character that they present him to us to be. Now, the mistake that he made was he actually believed that the French would actually operate with him on equal footing, because in his mind, I proved myself as a general. I've defended the colony valiantly. The trade has been robust. The colony remains productive, right? Under my leadership, the colony is still the richest colony in the world. So he believed that logically, the French government would put one plus one together and say, okay, let's keep him on board as the leader because obviously he's doing a good job. But no, it's about white supremacy. It's not about being productive, right? So that's the mistake that he made, right? Thinking that he could actually operate and interface with the French government on equal footing as a French general. No. And they showed him that when they kidnapped him and he died in prison. He believed in his mind that I've shown and proven myself as a French general. So I can go and take private meetings with the French and they're not going to betray me or kidnap me. So that's why he got entrapped when he took that meeting with one of the French generals and they kidnapped him and arrested him. Now, like I said, when you eliminate Toussaint, who is going to protect you from Dessalines and Christophe, right? In 1804, when Dessalines ordered the massacre of the French population, that would not have happened if Toussaint Louverture was alive. Toussaint Louverture would have been able to pull Dessalines to the side and Dessalines would have listened to him. In 1814, when the French government had sent an ambassador to Christophe's territory and Christophe decided to have him arrested and killed, that would not have happened if Toussaint Louverture was alive. Toussaint Louverture would have been able to take Christophe to the side and he would have listened to him. So no, I don't believe that an individual who was docile and weak could command the respect of men like Christophe and Dessalines, right? If men like Christophe and Dessalines looked at you as their commander and their leader, then obviously you must have been a giant in human form, right? You must have been a giant amongst men. If these two men who were giants in their own right, they took a back seat to your leadership, right? When you step in a room, those men be quiet and take orders. So you must have been a giant when you was walking the earth. That's why even myself, I had to re-examine the legacy of Toussaint. And one thing I had to realize is without Toussaint Louverture, there is no Dessalines or Christophe. Because when you examine Dessalines' leadership and Christophe's leadership, it was all a continuation of Toussaint Louverture. From the governing style to the military structure, all of it was simply an inheritance left behind by Toussaint Louverture. When you examine my videos on Christophe and we examine the prosperity and the legacy and the productivity, all of that was simply everything he learned watching Toussaint Louverture govern. He simply copied it and simply reproduced it. Dessalines and Christophe in their governing styles, they did not come up with anything original in their governing styles. Everything was taken from Toussaint Louverture, right? These men were students of Toussaint Louverture. These men were the young boys and he was the elder. So in reality, there would be no Dessalines, there would be no Christophe without Toussaint Louverture because they were proteges. They were students of his teachings, right? They were disciples of Toussaint Louverture. When we examine all the magnificence and splendor that Christophe was able to achieve when he was in power, all of that came from the knowledge that he gained when he was a lieutenant in the army of Toussaint Louverture, watching how he governed, watching how he galvanized and organized and commanded the military, watching how he interacted with the different governments and heads of state to advance his personal agendas. All of that came from the knowledge he gained working as a protege, as a lieutenant under Toussaint Louverture, and the same for Dessalines. But the reason why they focus more on Toussaint Louverture is because Dessalines and Christophe, they were not as diplomatic or friendly or willing to work within the system as Toussaint Louverture, right? Dessalines said, listen, we going for full independence. We're not going for, self-governing autonomy. We going for full independence. We are severing diplomatic ties with the French government, right? We are massacring the French population, right? So when you eliminate the elder and you allow the young boys to take the reins of power, listen, whatever happened to you after that, that was your own fault. That was your own fault, because Toussaint Louverture was the only one able to control Dessalines and Christophe. And once you eliminate the wise elder, you're not going to be able to control the young hotheads. And the reason why they don't talk about Dessalines and they slander Dessalines, right? They told so many lies on Dessalines. They said Dessalines was a butcher, a genocidaire, a genocider. They said Dessalines was ugly and illiterate. They said so many slanderous things about Dessalines in those days, when in reality Dessalines was a highly intelligent, charismatic, fly black man, very handsome black man, and the ladies was going crazy for Dessalines. But in the Western narrative, they say Dessalines was an illiterate butcher, an ugly African. Man, they say so many slanderous things about the general. Rest in peace to Dessalines. Long live Dessalines, man. But in comparison to Toussaint Louverture, they slandered the image of Dessalines, gave him the worst, most slanderous image in the Western narrative of history. But they don't want to shed too much light on Dessalines because Dessalines killed legions and legions of whites, right? Dessalines literally killed thousands upon thousands of white men, women, and children. So they don't want to put too much attention on him, because in that story, you can't really frame the narrative in your favor, because Dessalines defeated you and humiliated you and massacred your women and children. So they don't want to talk too much about Dessalines, right? They don't want to talk too much about him because they could never humiliate Dessalines in the same way they humiliated Toussaint Louverture. And the same goes for Christophe, right? The same goes for Christophe. There is no aspect in Christophe's narrative where the Europeans actually came out victorious. Here you got a black man who has interfaced with all the European powers on a battlefield, and he has never lost, right? He has came out victorious at the end of each battle, whether he was going up against the British, the French, the Spanish, or the Portuguese when he was attacking the European slave ships. This is a man who has interfaced with all of the major colonial militaries, and he never lost. And when he died by suicide at his own hand. And he died inside his palace, the most magnificent building in the Western Hemisphere, and he died with billions of dollars. So they can't really shed light on Christophe's story, because Christophe's story is a story of victory and achievement and magnificence, and it would simply make the black man look too good, right? It would simply make the black man look too good. And Christophe, killing the French ambassador. It was just too much humiliation for the Europeans when it came to Christophe's narrative. So when it comes to Dessalines and Christophe, they simply either slander those men, call them, brutal, tyrant dictators and ugly Africans, even though both of those men were very charismatic and handsome and the ladies was going crazy. But they can't really co-opt their narratives in the same way they could co-opt Toussaint Louverture. When it comes to Toussaint Louverture, they could say, he was diplomatic, he was willing to work with us, and in the end, we killed him and, humiliated him in front of the world, and he died in our prisons. So that is a more digestible narrative, more acceptable narrative that they would want to promote. They don't want to promote Dessalines, somebody who killed, legions of whites. They don't want to promote Christophe, somebody who achieved amazing achievements and built crazy monuments and established an amazing life for himself in the middle of white supremacy, in the middle of the European colonies. He was living as a king. They do not want to shed light on those narratives. So the reason why I shed light on those narratives is because they are intentionally buried, distorted, or slandered. So I came to rectify those true narratives. I came to rectify the narrative, correct the narrative, and really shed light on the true history. So it's not that I have anything against Toussaint. I have much respect for Toussaint, but I feel like we have to shed light on the full narrative in totality, right? Not just a piece of the narrative that's acceptable for, the Western audiences. No, we have to shed light on our true history and give thanks and praise to all of our ancestors in equal form. So that's the reason why I shed light on Christophe and Dessalines, because I feel they don't get their just due. They don't get the recognition. And these men, if it's any two men that deserve the recognition, every chance we could give it to them, it's those two men. Nothing against Toussaint, because like I said, without Toussaint Louverture, there would be no Dessalines or Christophe. That's the reality. So anyways, man, I'm not going to be here too long, man. It's your boy Nefakari Dessalines back in the Billy S&D. Subscribe to the Patreon, man, to gain access to dozens of videos that have never been uploaded to YouTube. Anyways, man, support the album, Sahel 1816. Go to my homepage, go to my playlist section, enjoy the album, and I'm gone. Peace.
Told me she loved me and said that it's real. So independent, ain't signing no deal. Feel like a king and I'm up at Cap Henry. I'm in the citadel, top of the hill. Trying to run up and we let off a cannon. Secret location, I'm keeping it sealed. You ain't retaliate, Franco Medina came to the country and he got killed. You ain't retaliate, Rafi and Mans. Thought you was law, thought you was real. Didn't even wanna come pick up the body. Had your man locked up, he died in the cell. Up at the palace, I'm throwing the party. Right on the south and I'm giving them hell. And my little shorty, she looking exotic. African features, she casting a spell. Run to the check like I work on my fitness. Wake up each morning and handle my business. Said that she love me, she want my genetics. Wanna get married and make it official. Wanna get married and have my babies. Up in the city, I'm riding Mercedes. Up in the city, they treat me like royalty. Feeling like Dolph, talking about lords. Spreading my wings and I had to get fly. Up at the top, an incredible vibe. Came from the bottom, I'm up in the sky. Everyone look and said, baby, you fine. Wake up each morning and handle my business. They just be talking, you see me, I live it. Ride on my enemies, sounding like thunder. 1804, got that shit in my spirit. 1804 when I step in the building. 1804, and that's word of my mother. Rock my women and die for my brother. Never gon' fold when I'm deep under pressure. Tell them we back and they better accept it. Move like a king, every step is divine. Ride on my enemies with no exception. Taking revenge and I'm taking what's mine. Pour up a drink and it's time that we toast. Watching my back, keep my enemies close. Only the family, I stick with my brothers. Candace position outside of the coast. Heavy artillery for the protection. Move like a general, stick to the code. Feel like a king when I'm up in the north. Beautiful women, they trying to get chose. Launch an invasion all over the south. Capture the capital with all my woes. Look at my energy and my demeanor. Dripping that ice and that's head to my toes. Lately I'm flexing all on the Americans. Flexing my muscle on missing my road. Just got a carriage just coming from London. Boy, that shit cash, I ain't taking no loans. Boy, that shit cash, that's fresh on the boat. Enemy know I got millions in gold. Enemy know I got choppers and cannons. How did I do it? They can't understand it. How did I do it? It's cause I'm relentless. Call me King Harry, my name is cemented. Call me King Harry, I'm up in the palace. Call me King Harry, I'm raising the status.